imposed using the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Now, this particular case tests the limit of presidential authority, as lower courts ruled that Trump exceeded his powers by applying a law meant for national emergencies to broad trade measures. Now, this challenge comes from businesses and 12 states, mostly Democratic-led, arguing that the tariffs could have trillions in economic impact. Now, during the hearing itself, U.S. Solicitor General D. John Sawyer has defended Trump's actions, arguing that the tariffs have strengthened U.S. negotiating power and have prevented economic retaliation from foreign countries. Conservative and liberal justices presented Sawyer on whether IEEPA truly grants the president authority to impose tariffs, with questions about whether Congress had explicitly authorized such sweeping economic measures. The case also invokes the Supreme Court's major questions doctrine, which requires clear congressional authorization for executive actions of vast economic or potential significance in the political arena as well. Now, joining us on this discussion is my colleague Maresha Barve. Maresha, what more can you tell our viewers with regards to this particular case? Of course, there are questions being posed on whether what Trump is doing is an overreach, because at the crux, tariffs come under the purview of the U.S. Congress. So how can we expect this to pan out? We do know that the U.S. Supreme Court currently has a conservative-leaning majority.
Well, yes, Pia, like you have very rightly mentioned, I would first like to answer your question by giving you a rather dive into a little background into what the tariffs hold. Now, Donald Trump's tariff policy in his current second term involves the baseline of 10% tariffs on almost all imports and significantly a higher reciprocal or punitive tariffs on specific countries or products, which have obviously led to an escalation in global trade wars. Now, like you have mentioned, there have been a lot of judicial and legal challenges that this decision by Donald Trump has faced. To give you a little bit more insight, the Trump administration has justified these tariffs under national security claims and the International Emergency Economic Power Act, which is, like you mentioned, the IEEPA Act, all right, which allows the president to regulate commerce during national emergency. Now, the administration argues that the goal is to protect domestic manufacturing within the U.S. itself, reduce trade deficits within the nation, and generate revenue to replace income taxes. Now, however, federal courts have consistently ruled that the IEEPA-based tariffs are an illegal overreach of presidential authority, as the law was not intended to impose broader tariffs. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court began its hearing and the arguments of it in this month, in the November of 2025, and this ruling could have massive implications, potentially requiring a refund which is estimated to almost $750 billion to $1 trillion in collected duties. Well, it has also, just like it has had legal implications, we cannot overlook the economic implications, of course, of these tariffs. The tariffs have led a significant disruption in global supply chains and economic uncertainty. The policies have actually contributed to a downgrade of global GDP because of instability, and have prompted trading partners like India in itself to diversify their export. India being, like I mentioned, one of the countries. There have been multiple other countries that have also been hit by this, which, for example, is Brazil, with 50% of tariff that has been hit on almost all goods. China is a complex nation in itself, where generally around 30% after a recent de-escalation has happened in talks with Donald Trump and China's Xi Jinping, with a 10% tariff on which is also recently claimed as the fentanyl tariff, reducing announced in October. So
Yes.
considering its legal and economic implications and the worldwide global trade war that has been going on, these are the implications, Pia, of
Indeed.
Trump's tariff.
Indeed. Indeed, and what remains to be seen is how exactly will the Supreme Court vote on it, because what they do and their decision will, of course, set a precedent. If they vote in favor of Donald Trump, that will set a precedent onto how far-reaching a U.S. president's actions can be, whether that can, sort of overrule what the Congress can do or not. And on the other, if they do not accept Trump's tariffs, of course, all of the tariffs that he has imposed, as Marisha has put it, they become null and void. And of course, Trump will have to look to other means. Stay on with us as we track further details. We're now learning that Donald Trump has called on Republican senators at the White House to end both mail-in ballots and the Senate filibuster, framing it as essential to advancing his legislative agenda amid ongoing budgetary gridlocks. Now, speaking to GOP lawmakers, Trump has emphasized that terminating the filibuster is the only way to pass the legislation, warning that failure to act would lead Republicans in a very bad direction. It would prevent any sort of meaningful policy progress as well. Listen in to what Donald Trump has stated.
It's time for Republicans to do what they have to do, and that's terminate the filibuster. It's the only way you can do it. And if you don't terminate the filibuster, you'll be in bad shape. We won't pass any legislation. There'll be no legislation passed for 3.25. We have 3.25 years, so it's a long time. And we should do our own bills. We should get out. We should do our own bills. We should open up. We should start tonight with the country's open. Congratulations. Then we should pass voter ID. We should pass no mail-in voting. We should pass all the things that we want to pass, make our elections secure and safe, because California is a disaster. Many of the states are disasters. And they said about mail-in ballots, if there is mail-in ballots, there will definitely be corruption, because they pass through too many hands. I mean, you go in to vote and they want your card. Even me, I went into Palm Beach. You go in to vote, they want your card. You're this, you're that. They say, I'm sorry to do this, sir, but I have to look at your identification. I said, that's all right. I love that.
All right, there, of course, viewers, you've just heard what Donald Trump has had to say. Marisha, my colleague, is still with us. Marisha, we've been discussing what's taking place in the United States as far as the government shutdown is concerned. It's broken the record. It's entered its 36th day, of course, following numerous federal workers, around 750,000 to be very specific. There are billions of dollars on the line. Losses amounting to multiple billions are expected to take place as every day goes by. But the Republicans and Democrats are not really coming on the same page. They've both, stuck their foot in the ground, and they've stated that we will not move from our position. Now, what's interesting about the filibuster rule is, Marisha, that it requires 60 votes for the budgetary bill in the Senate. Republicans hold 53 seats. They are 7 short of that magic number. Walk our viewers through what Trump is trying to do, how he's trying to bypass this, and of course the concerns he's raised in the aftermath of the Democrats sweeping the mayoral elections in New York, the gubernatorial elections in New Jersey and Virginia as well, and the fact that he's basically called mail-in ballots as fraudulent.
Yes, well, Pia, echoing your thought, I would firstly start to mention that this is the longest government shutdown that the US has actually seen. This is actually rather a monumental, or rather very notable instance, because unlike any other government, right now US is facing its longest US government shutdown. Now, like you mentioned, Trump has called for the removal of the US Senate filibuster rule as the government shutdown is still in place. Now, like you also very rightly mentioned, that the filibuster rule requires 60 votes in the Senate to pass most legislation, and the Republicans already hold a 53 to 47 majority. Now, Trump says that the filibuster rule is blocking action to reopen the government. This is a conflict in opinion between the Senate. There is still no agreement in sight, I would like to mention, as the Senate Republicans push for a temporary funding bill until late November. Now, basically, while Democrats demand negotiations to renew federal health care and tax credits, I would also like to point out that the government shutdown has kept much of the federal government closed since October 1st, impacting, like you mentioned, almost 750,000 workers. This is a record number. This is a huge amount and a huge class of working professionals or laborers in the United States. Some federal employees continue to work without pay, including law enforcement and immigration officers, while troops are also receiving very little pay, minimum from what they have been receiving. This has put hold on the economic baseline of the US. Professionals are struggling. It is imperatively hard for people in the United States to survive, let alone go for work on a regular basis.
Indeed, and many have been laid off as well. Marisha, what else can you tell our viewers about Trump, of course, coming out and decrying the mail-in ballot system? He's, of course, also been pushing for mandatory citizenship proof and voting IDs to be checked before people go and cast their votes. This is something that the Republicans have been, raking up for quite a while. Elon Musk has been very vociferous on X throughout the year.
Well, yes, Pia. To give you a little bit more and our viewers a little bit more insight about the mail-in ballots, let me tell you how this works. Basically, there is this concept or a convenience concept in place where voters can actually mail in their votes. These are called the mail-in ballots. Basically, you can mail in your votes if in case you cannot be physically present to put in your votes. Now, the reason why Trump has said that they need to be removing or the condemnation of the mail-in ballots is because it can be used to manipulate the votes. It can be manipulated, votes can be manipulated, and also for people who, let's say, are trying to overthrow the Senate votes in an illegalistic manner. This is why there's this common notion that Trump would condemn the mail-in ballot votes to come through. Now, but this obviously restricts all those who have disabilities. Let's say people who are senior citizens who cannot physically travel or cannot travel to cast in their votes. This creates a hindrance in the whole voting process in itself. So considering all of this, he has also condemned the filibuster rule like we spoke about before, where he is, where there needs to be nothing that could distract the voters from voting or create a prolonged shutdown in the government in itself.
All right, Marisha, stay on with us. We're tracking more news, this time from Europe. We're now learning that Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Šakna has urged China to halt its economic support for Russia and the war in Ukraine. Šakna has called on China to align with European and US efforts to pressurize President Putin to agreeing to a ceasefire. This, of course, highlights growing concerns over the war in Europe, the fact that we've seen an escalation take place recently with energy infrastructure and power grids being targeted on either side of the border. Listen in to what Margus had to say.
First, of course, China says that they are not part of this military conflict, but I was very clear that China has a huge leverage on Russia, every week more and more, because Russian economy is weak. As well, President Trump put the sanctions on two very important energy companies, Gazprom and Rosneft of Russia. As well, President Trump and President Xi, they had a meeting, as Trump said as well, that this pressure is very important, that China should join. And I think that China can do a lot if joining the pressure to Russia.
Meanwhile, Germany has announced that it will offer cash incentives to Afghan nationals stranded in Pakistan, urging them to forego their efforts to enter Germany under a recently frozen resettlement program. Now, reports indicate that these financial offers could amount to several thousand euros as well. This move comes as part of the German government's under conservative Chancellor Friedrich Merz and his efforts to show it's addressing concerns about immigration, which is a key issue ahead of the upcoming elections. Around 2,000 Afghans have approved for relocation to Germany under a program designed for people at risk under the Taliban rule or those who had worked with the German forces and who have been stranded in Pakistan. Now, issuing a formal confirmation on this move, German Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt has explained the reasoning behind the payment offers at a recent press briefing. Listen in.
In den vergangenen Monaten immer deutlich gemacht, dass wir alle Personen einem Aufnahmeverfahren zuführen werden, eine Sicherheitsüberprüfung durchführen werden, wenn wir davon ausgehen, dass sie eine rechtsverbindliche Aufnahmezusage haben. Einige haben die ja auch vor deutschen Gerichten bestätigt bekommen. Vergleichbare Fälle, davon können wir ausgehen, dass das dann auch rechtsverbindliche Aufnahmezusagen.
Meanwhile, in more news, lawyers representing one of the suspects in the Louvre heist have urged the media to exercise caution in their coverage of the case. Speaking outside the Bobigny courthouse near Paris, defense lawyer Maxime Caval stated that his client has a right to dignity and privacy regardless of the case's high-profile status. Listen in.
Les erreurs ont été communiquées par Madame le procureur de la République. Certaines erreurs ont également été communiquées dans les médias. On parle de braquage. On parle de braquage. C'est une erreur factuelle. Il s'agit d'un cambriolage. À ce titre, je vous indique, au nom de mes trois confrères, que nous serons extrêmement vigilants sur le respect de l'exactitude des propos qui seront relayés dans cette affaire. Et surtout, je le dis,
Now, the suspect appeared in court for a separate matter involving criminal damage to police cell and mirror as well during a 2019 detention, which is unrelated to the Louvre heist. 4 people are currently under investigation and remain in custody over the October 19th heist when hooded thieves broke into the museum's Apollo Gallery, home to the French crown jewels. More news coming in from Europe. We are now learning that the European Union's 27 member states have reached a deal on a revised 2040 climate target ahead of the COP30 summit that is taking place next week in Brazil. This, of course, aims to balance ambition along with flexibility. Danish Climate Minister Lars Agard has praised the agreement, stating that the bloc has delivered on the European dream, reflecting a commitment to collective climate action. European Commissioner Wopke Hostraka has highlighted that the deal provides both speed in implementation and flexibility for member states in order to meet their targets. Meanwhile, the agreement itself represents progress. Some environmental advocates argue that the weakened target may fall short of what exactly is needed to combat climate change effectively. Listen in to the statements made by both leaders.
It is a deal, it is an agreement that is pragmatic, that is ambitious, that delivers speed, and it delivers flexibility. And what we need to make sure, and that is at the heart of this, is, and again, I've said that also many times, climate competitiveness and independence need to go hand in hand going forward.
We agreed on the 2040 targets, on all the content of the climate law. We agreed on an NDC. So we have now the 3 pillars that the presidency was aiming for before we are going to jump into the plane to Belém. We have the mandate. We have the EU climate law setting a binding.
Meanwhile, viewers, news coming in from the Middle East. Medical teams at the Nasser Medical Complex in Gaza have received the bodies of 15 Palestinian prisoners returned by Israel under the US-brokered ceasefire exchange deal. Authorities have stated that the bodies were transferred into the hospital morgue after being handed over at a border crossing. Take a look.
لقد وصلنا من جانب الآخر عبر الهيئة الأولية الدولية للصليب الأحمر 15 جثمانا لجثمان الشهداء ليصبح العدد 285 جثمان.
Now, viewers, this exchange has come 2 days after Hamas returned the body of Israeli-American soldier Itay Chen, who was killed during the October 7th attacks and was held in Gaza ever since. The transfers are part of a broader arrangement under which Israel and Hamas have both been gradually returning remains and hostages as part of efforts to uphold the fragile truce. Meanwhile, viewers, more news coming in. We're now learning that Asian e-commerce giant Shein has expressed its desire to engage in dialogue with French authorities after the government moved to suspend the company's digital platform. Shein spokesperson Quentin Rafat has acknowledged the announcement and emphasized that the company's commitment to customer safety and the integrity of its marketplace are paramount, which hosts third-party sellers. Rafat has in fact added that Shein hopes to resolve the issue through direct discussions with French officials as soon as possible. Now, this comes just hours after Shein celebrated the opening of its first ever physical store in Paris, marking a new milestone for the online retailer. Meanwhile, viewers, we know that protests against Shein continue in Paris. Demonstrators gathered outside the newly opened Shein store, describing Shein's actions as shameful and incompetent, calling for accountability and stricter enforcement regulations. Listen in to what some of the protesters have had to say.
Est-ce que les consommateurs en question, vous les avez interrogés, est-ce qu'ils savent qu'un certain nombre de ces vêtements sont faits par des prisonniers politiques? Est-ce qu'ils savent qu'un certain nombre de ces vêtements sont dangereux pour la santé parce qu'ils sont couverts de produits chimiques? Est-ce qu'ils savent que ces vêtements vont tomber en ruine peu de temps, malheureusement, après leur achat? Je veux dire, la course, entre guillemets, effrénée au bas prix pour attirer des consommateurs, c'est un réflexe qui est aussi vieux que le monde. Notre rôle à nous, c'est d'éclairer sur les enjeux sous-jacents et d'une certaine manière, en croyant faire une bonne affaire, on concourt à la destruction d'un monde qui est celui qui nous protège.
Accompagner les Français pauvres, ça veut dire s'opposer de manière absolument radicale à la destruction de notre modèle social, de s'opposer de manière radicale au fait que, par exemple, on va augmenter les franchises médicales, on va réduire le remboursement des médicaments. C'est aussi pour ça que les gens ils se tournent vers la fast fashion. C'est pas forcément par gaieté de cœur. D'ailleurs, il y a beaucoup de
Le gouvernement, il a sa responsabilité. S'il ne fait rien, c'est qu'il est coupable. S'il ne fait rien, c'est qu'il est complice. Aujourd'hui, vous avez une entreprise dont on sait qu'elle détruit l'environnement, dont on sait qu'elle utilise des esclaves, dont on sait qu'elle vend aujourd'hui des poupées de jeunes filles sexualisées pour des pédocriminels. Donc elle met en danger nos enfants. Une entreprise qui vend des armes et avec...
All right, viewers, with that, it's a wrap on